Hey there YouTube, it's Nathan Fry here. Today I want to talk to you about mounting your own antlers. So I don't know about you, but for me, when I shoot a buck, I find that the $375, $400, or even $500 or $600 that it costs to have a shoulder mount done of my deer is just way too steep. I've mentioned this before in this channel, but I am a hunter that is on a budget. But what I've discovered over the last few years is that I can mount my antlers on a plaque, and I get so much enjoyment out of not just hanging them on my wall, but actually the whole process of mounting them up myself. I get a lot of creative liberty in how I want to mount them, and I don't do every mount the same, and I just really enjoy it. So today I'm going to show you sort of my basic methodology. Again, you can change it up to sort of fit your creative style. You can change it up based upon maybe the access you have to tools. You may not be able to do certain things that I do, or you may have access to better tools and be able to do it that way as well. So the first thing I'm going to assume is that you've already have your antlers cut off the deer, and you want to take some time to really clean them up well. If they've been sitting around for a little while, you may need to stick the base of the antlers or the base of the skull where you've cut them off, and you may want to stick that in some boiling water to sort of soften up some of that meat and tissue there, and use a knife or whatever you have, but just kind of scrape all of that off, cut all the hair off. You want it to be really clean. You don't want to be sticking a bunch of meat and gummy stuff into your mount. The next thing you're going to want to do is really consider, what do I want to mount this to? Now for myself, I typically go to Lowe's or Home Depot and I buy some oak, and it comes in a 2 foot by 1 foot section and 3/4 inch thick, and I can make 2 of these kind of plaques out of that piece of wood. And this is kind of a basic style that I've used for several different antlers. But I've also used that same piece of oak for some different unique styles. I've made some picture frames I've made some mounts that have some picture frames built right into them. I'll show you also the one that I did that I cut out in the shape of an arrowhead. And that also had a picture frame built into it. So you can do whatever you want. If you don't have your own woodworking tools to make a plaque like this, where you're going to actually have to cut it out and use a router to put the edge on it and sand it and everything like that, there's a lot of options you can get even from Hobby Lobby. There's some oval plaques, and there's some plaques that look like they're cut out of a log with bark still on them. A lot of really unique options. Again, be creative. So once you have your plaque, you can see this one's already stained. You're going to want to decide if you want to stain it, pick the color of stain that you want, decide whether you want to polyurethane it to give it a little bit more gloss and a little bit more protective finish. Typically, I like mine to be a little bit more dull and rustic looking, and so I'll put a couple coats of stain on it. And I won't put any polyurethane on it or anything like that. But once you've got your plaque ready to go, the next thing that I do is I go and I find a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. Again, this is going to be something you may have to do a little bit differently if you don't have access to any woodworking tools. But you can cut this out with some very basic woodworking tools. If you have something like a jigsaw, you can cut out this shape. You can see I've done enough of these now where I actually have this one labeled large template. So every time that I want to make a new mount, I can just get this out and copy it out and cut it out onto a new piece of wood. This is going to be the basic shape that you're going to mount your antlers to. And so you'll see, I'm going to show you here throughout this video, you're going to be seeing footage of a project that I worked on with a friend of mine who shot his first ever buck, and I helped him to mount it up. And so you'll see throughout the process of us working on his antlers. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take the antlers, and you're going to take the skull, and you're going to need to drill out the skull. You're going to need to drill a couple of holes through the skull, and then just take some basic drywall screws and drill through the skull and into this piece of board. Typically what I do, since this board is very thin, I get screws that are long enough to pass all the way through, and then I take a Dremel tool, but you could also use something like a hacksaw or even a file if you had the patience, and cut the back of those screws off. Because what you're going to want is you're going to want this to fit flush up against your plaque. And so you're going to want to make sure the backs of those screws are cut off. If the back of your antlers or the back of the skull where you cut the antlers off is not at the exact angle that you want it to be sitting, and you maybe want to even put it up against the wall and just kind of imagine the way those antlers are going to be coming out of there, then you definitely want to spend time right now to do that. This is the time. Maybe you want to take a grinder and grind a different angle on the back of the bone of the skull, or maybe you want to use some shims on one side or the other if they're not sitting quite straight, but you want to make sure that it's sitting the way that you want it to look, because the way that it attaches onto this is really going to impact the final result of your mount. Once you have your antlers mounted up to this piece of wood just the way you like, it's time to start creating a mold over it. And what I use is I use plaster of Paris, and I get this box right here. There's a lot of glare there. I use this box right here, plaster of Paris. You can get this at Walmart for $3 or $4. And this will typically do more than one mount. It will do probably 3 mounts maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on exactly how you mount up your plaster of Paris. And so one thing that I would give you as a tip is make it definitely a little bit runnier than what you might think. It gets hard very quick and starts to set up. I would do small batches and just start to get the basic mold, and then especially as you get to the end, make it fairly thin and just try to get it really smooth. One of the things you'll see as we work on the antlers here is that we're going to be just dipping our fingers in water and actually using that to smooth it out. We'll also use an old kitchen knife to kind of smear it on. You could use a spatula or anything, an old piece of wood that you have laying around the house. I find the backside of a kitchen knife works really well. And then once I get it pretty much the way that I want, I'll use my fingers to kind of smear it out and get it really smooth. Also then the next day or a couple days later, once it has had a chance to dry, you're going to want to let it sit and dry. Once it's dry, I'll even take the backside of that knife again and just kind of scrape things smooth and get it kind of the way I want. And then I'll also take some sandpaper and just smooth everything down. Once you have your antlers mounted to the board and you have your plaster on and everything's nice and smooth, you're ready to move to the step where you start covering your antlers. You have many options of what you can use to cover your antlers. One of the things that I use most commonly is this piece called real leather. And this particular piece is 8.5 by 11, and you can get it at Hobby Lobby or some other craft stores. And it runs for about $7 for this piece. However, especially at Hobby Lobby, you can almost always get on their website or their app and find a 40% off coupon. And so this typically costs more like $4 for this piece of leather. If you're just doing one, this is a great option. If you're going to do a lot, or if you have exceptionally large antlers, this piece may not cover if you make your plaster and everything too large. Or if you're going to be doing a lot of antlers, last year I was working on quite a few, and so I actually found a roll of this same sort of, I guess it's like a suede leather or something. And this particular color is Toast, I believe is what it's called. And Hobby Lobby sometimes sells these in certain of their stores. I got this on eBay. And it's a roll that has around 4 to 6 square feet. It's not sold exact. This stuff is really nice. It is sometimes a little tricky to get the wrinkles out of the project when you're wrapping around corners because it's just a little bit stiffer. Again, I showed you the arrowhead mount that I did with the picture in it. And for that one, I used some of this just real tree material that I got at a material store that actually used for some curtains in my office and had some left over. And so I used that to wrap one of the antlers as well. You could use felt if you prefer to that look, or any kind of material really you could use. When you're ready to start wrapping, typically what I do is I start and I staple around the back with a staple gun, and I staple on each side, and then I work up around the antlers. The antlers, you really just need to take your time and cut slowly with an X-Acto knife or a utility knife or even a pair of scissors, but you just really need to take your time. If you cut too far down too quickly, you can easily end up with a mistake here that's hard to fix. I just cut a little bit at a time, and usually what I do is I cut a little bit above the base of the antlers, and then I will actually take the material and create a small fold all the way around the antlers so that it creates a small bump or bevel right there as it meets the base of the antlers. Then once I get all that done, I typically use a little bit of glue because there will be a seam behind each antler, and you want that seam as much behind the antler as you can so it's not seen. I will use a little bit of hot glue. I'm sure there's other glues that will work as well to glue down the flap where that seam meets. Once both antlers are done at the top, then I'll start working around the front and finish off the curve. One thing that you'll notice is you're probably going to have to cut slits on the back side when you're stapling down the material in order to cut a relief as you make the curve. Once your antlers are plastered and you have everything wrapped and everything the way that you want, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take the antlers and the base, and you're going to take screws from behind your plaque and go through the plaque and into that piece of plywood, and your mount is almost finished. The last thing that I typically do for my mounts, and this is totally optional at this point, but I got some of this also real leather, just like this other leather that I mentioned, It's the same brand. It's called Real Leather Craft Lace. This is called Latigo Lace, and it is 1/8 inch by 50 feet. Now this is a little bit expensive in my opinion. This is $19, but with 50 feet of it, it is just this strip of leather. And so what I do, and by I mean my wife, she'll take 3 strands of this and braid it. And then using hot glue, we'll just use that to finish off the edge where the leather and the plastered piece meets the plaque. Now depending on how yours meets up, if everything meets up nice and you don't have any cracks or seams to hide, you may decide you don't want to do this. I personally think this is what really finishes it off. Again, I mentioned $19 seems a bit steep, but at Hobby Lobby you can often get discounts. And with 50 feet of this, I believe that the typical mount for me has taken about 5 feet apiece. So you would be able to do probably 10 different mounts with one spool of this leather. So that obviously means you're not spending a whole lot per mount. There's also a lot of other options. For instance, the mount that I did with this camel material, you noticed that I used a paracord braid to finish off that mount. Again, be creative. You might want to use some other form of rustic looking rope to finish it off or whatever, but be creative with what you do. The last thing that I forgot to mention is you are going to want to figure out a way to mount this to the wall. I normally go to Lowe's and buy a set of keyhole hangers. They're very inexpensive, I think less than $1 a piece or maybe $1.50 a piece. You have a couple of options there. You can just screw them straight into the back of the plaque, or you can take a chisel or something like that, and you can actually chisel out and then embed that keyhole hanger so that it sits more flush and is not going to create any gap when you hang it on the wall. The next thing to do is just put a screw in the wall, mount it up on the wall, and enjoy looking at it and reliving the memories. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. If you have any questions, or if you did your own mount after watching this video, let me know how it went down in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give me a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing if you enjoy my content. And until next time, remember to get off YouTube and get outdoors.